Okay, so this is Bible study for Genesis chapter 13, and the heading in my Bible says Abraham and Lot separate. So that should tell you just a little bit about what we're going to be talking about. Before we get started, let's pray. Dear God, we're so grateful for this day, thankful for your willingness to and even desire to take this time to be with us, to speak to us, to change us, to use your word to apply it to our lives and show us how we might be more and more like you and the image that you created us in. Lord, we're so grateful. Lord, be with us during this time. In Jesus' name, amen. So the text for today says, So Abram went up from Egypt to the Negev with his wife and everything he had, and Lot went with him. Abram had become very wealthy in livestock and in silver and gold. From the Negev he went from place to place until he came to Bethel, to the place where between Bethel and Ai, where his tent had been earlier, and where he had first built an altar. There Abram called on the name of the Lord. Now Lot, who was moving about with Abram, also had flocks and herds and tents. But the land could not support them while they stayed together, for their possessions were so great that they were not able to stay together. And quarreling arose between Abram's herders and Lot's. The Canaanites and Perizzites were also living in the land at the time. So Abram said to Lot, Let's not have any quarreling between you and me, or between your herders and mine, for we are close relatives. Is not the whole land before you? Let's part company. If you go to the left, I'll go to the right. If you go to the right, I'll go to the left. Lot looked around and saw that the whole plain of the Jordan toward Zoar was well watered, like the garden of the Lord, like the land of Egypt. This was before the Lord destroyed Sodom and Gomorrah. So Lot chose for himself the whole plain, the whole plain of the Jordan, and set out toward the east. The two men parted company. Abram lived in the land of Canaan, while Lot lived among the cities of the plain and pitched his tents near Sodom. Now the people of Sodom were wicked and were sinning greatly against the Lord. The Lord said to Abram after Lot had parted from him, Look around from where you are, to the north and south, to the east and west. All the land you see, I will give to you and your offspring forever. I will make your offspring like the dust of the earth, so that if anyone could count the dust, then your offspring could be counted. Go walk through the length and breadth of the land, for I am giving it to you. So Abram went to live near the great trees of Mamre at Hebron, where he pitched his tents. There he built an altar to the Lord. All right, so remember that you can download a PDF copy of this Bible study at www.abqnaz.org/alive so that you can follow along with us as we study this text. Number one on our study says, What happened in last week's Bible study? So if you were with us in last week's Bible study, then you'll remember that we've been talking about Abram going around. There was a famine. Abram has been here before at the beginning of chapter 12. He was in this same area. And then he went to Egypt. And in Egypt, he asked his wife to tell Pharaoh and anybody that she was his sister. And so Pharaoh took her into his palace and then was diseased because of her. And said, Why didn't you tell me she was your wife? Now go, get out of here, take all your stuff, whatever. And at some level, Abram was blessed because of all of this. He gained flocks and things while he was in Egypt. And we don't really know how much time he spent there, how long it took Pharaoh to realize what was going on. We don't really know much about this, but we do know that now before Abram and Lot were together with all their possessions and people and everything, and they were in this area just fine, other than that there was a famine. And then they went down to Egypt, and now they come back, and the land can't support them. We don't know if that's because this is a short time and it's still somewhat in famine, and they just need to be in different areas, or we don't know if it was a longer time and the famine has subsided, but they've gained so much in the process of time that that now even with it being well watered, they can't be supported on the same land. We really don't know a lot about this, um, at least from the text itself. Um, but we do know that well, we're going to talk about it, they're going to have to separate. So number 2 says what happens next in the beginning of this text, verses 1 through 4. It says Abram went up from Egypt to the Negev with his wife and everything he had, and Lot went with him. We learn that Abram had become very wealthy. Ultimately they continued to Bethel, to the place where they were before, between Bethel and Ai, and Abram called on the name of the Lord. Now I want you to go on the second page of this study, if you're looking at the PDF, or hopefully we've been able to print them on the back, so we save a little paper if we have them here in the service, in the actual Bible study time together. I want you to just look at the map and see there's this blue line that runs through sort of the middle of, not really exactly the middle, but the middle of Israel, what becomes Israel, of Canaan here, and it runs right between Bethel and Ai, and written alongside it is the watershed line. Um, so this is a high point in Israel, basically, where everything on one side runs to the Mediterranean Sea, and everything that falls on the other side um, goes down toward the Jordan River basin and the Dead Sea there. So basically, we understand this because if you're part of our church, we live in New Mexico, and if you drive west on I-40, you will hit a spot. Usually there's dust storms there, but you'll find a spot where there's a nice big sign on the highway, and it says Continental Divide. And at the Continental Divide, if you know anything about geography, or have just looked into that, basically everything on the west side of the Continental Divide flows toward the Pacific, and everything on the east side of the Continental Divide flows toward um, the the Atlantic. So that doesn't necessarily mean that there's no mountains higher than that spot or anything. In fact, I don't think that that's true at all. But it does mean that in general, the overall slope of the country uh, is down from that spot. So much so that the rivers run in that direction. And if there are high points or high spots in mountains that stick up, those rivers probably run around those high spots. And if water comes down from the mountains, then it finds its way into one of those rivers or streams that eventually goes that direction. Um, and uh, and so there's a continental divide east to west. I believe, although I've never been to that one, that there's also a continental divide north to south, and in most of America, the rivers run south. But if you get far enough north, you'll find a place where the rivers run north. Um, and it's just, that's what it is. So now Israel's much smaller than America, and so even in the pictures, you could actually see sort of how this high point looks, and it's running right down there. So what? Abram has done is he's found a high spot in the land that he has been given, that God has promised to his offspring. And previously in chapter 12, he built an altar and made an offering there. And this is a great spot to have a visible, all that God is giving to his family. Um, so he returns there. And remember that the Negev was down south in the wilderness, in the desert, sort of below the Dead Sea. But the place where he goes is north of the Dead Sea, just slightly, and west in this high point in this on this watershed line. Um, so let's continue on. That just gives us kind of a lay of the land and an idea of what's going on. Number 3 says, what do we learn about the situation in verses 5 through 7? A, Lot also had flocks and herds and tents. B, the land could not support them while they stayed together, for their possessions were so great. C, quarreling arose between Abram's herders and Lot's. D, the Canaanites and parasites were also living in the land at the time. So there was people already there, and Abram and Lot couldn't stay together because their herdsmen were fighting over space to feed the herds, to graze them. Um, so I'm not sure we understand this problem in America, because we go out and build cities in the desert and then just dig canals to bring water to them. I'm constantly amazed at the size that the city of Phoenix has grown, and its sort of surrounding towns and cities. In the middle of the desert, in a place that just doesn't seem like it could support that kind of city. They got a big canal running to it. Even Albuquerque, which is on a river, but apparently the Rio Grande is not quite as grand as it used to be, because people are taking water from it. And so I think, from what I understand, dug a big tunnel up into Colorado somehow to bring water from there, to supply our city and make sure that we continue to have water. We just find a way to make sure there's enough water, and as long as there's enough water, we can bring in just about everything else, food and whatever we need. Um, that's not the way it was. If you couldn't grow it, or if it wasn't already growing. So if you're grazing, you're not really growing things to eat. You're grazing your herds, which are going to be your food probably, and clothing and oil for lamps and whatever else. So if you got these animals that you need to feed, there needs to be enough grass and sort of natural occurring growth for them to eat. Otherwise, you're going to have to plant enough, and that takes time. And so, if there's not enough for all the animals, and they kind of eat it to the ground and it's dirt, then that's not a good situation. That doesn't sort of that's not sustainable, which is a word that we are working with in modern times, thinking about more than we used to. Um, so, um, so the nice thing is, whenever I used to work and travel a lot for work, um, I when I went into a town, if it was a small town especially, and I didn't have a rental car, I'd like to just walk. I'd walk a big block and get a lay of the land. What are the close stores to my hotel? What are the visuals? What can I see? And I had some great pictures of some of the small towns that I worked in when I was traveling a lot for work before I went into ministry. And I've went and seen some pretty cool sites when I've traveled for ministry events as well. Um, So that was just something that I like to do, get a lay of the land, understand what's around me. From this spot where Abram stands and where he's built this altar to God, he has a lay of the land. He can see what is available to them. Um, so that may be significant. Number four, what does Abram propose according to verses 8 and 9? So he says, Abram said to Lot, let's not have any quarreling between you and me, between your herders and mine, for we are close relatives. Is not the whole land before you? Let's part company. If you go left, I'll go right. If you go right, I'll go left. So he says, we don't need to fight. Look at all the land that's right here. In fact, I'll give you first choice. You pick the land that you want, and I'll go the other direction, and we'll both have as much as we need. Um, so now this is just an amazing thought. It's an amazing thought that anybody and we know in our world the chances of somebody giving somebody else first pick of land, it just seems unheard of. So we know that that's something that only God could do. So we know Abram is in contact with God, because any of us in our own flesh, given to our own desires, would always choose first. Abram has every right. He's probably, even though Lot has plenty as well, Abram's the elder. Abram's more wealthy. He could have chose whatever he wanted, but instead he gave Lot the choice. We're not going to fight. We're family. Look at all there is. There's plenty for both of us. You take first choice. Um, Unfortunately, I'm not even sure the people of God often take this view of things or take this way of things. When I hear of one of the best things that I learned early in ministry, even when I was frustrated with people going to another Bible study in our church, I remember talking to Pastor Steve, and some of my college and career folks had gone to his adult Bible study, and I was like, you know, those are my people. I think I told him that, and I was just frustrated. I'm trying to build my class. I'm trying to build the church, and they're going to his, and now he's got a bigger class and whatever. Well, his response to me was, there are plenty of lost people to go around, which didn't set well with me at the beginning. I mean, that was just like, well, that's a spiritual cop out, is what it felt like to me. But as I thought about it, I thought, and as I've matured, in fact, I think that was a moment of maturing for me, because as much as I didn't like the answer, it is true. And the point is, nobody cares if people go to my Bible. Jesus doesn't care if people are going to my Bible study or Pastor Steve's Bible study or Pastor James's Bible study or Pastor Patty's Bible study or whatever Bible study that people are going to. People don't care. And Jesus doesn't care if people are going to my church or to another church nearby or across town. And the funny thing is, I've had pastors since then complain to me like, well, this church moved in next to me, and I looked at him, I said, brother, I've always thought there's plenty of lost people to go around. And one guy said, that's what that pastor told me. He was so upset. But I've learned that we have a tendency to fight over people in the church, which is completely the opposite attitude that Abram had, because he looked at Lot and said, and I know this isn't about people, but I think we need to pay attention to whether we're really out for the will of God and the kingdom of God, or whether we're building our own kingdom. And so Abram decided that he was going to give Lot first choice in how Lot built his kingdom, and where. And he was going to take second choice, and he believed God would bless that. So I really think that's a big part of first of all, who we ought to be as the people of God. And second of all, I don't think it's an accident that Abram came to this proposal. I don't think you would come to this proposal if it weren't for the power of God. In fact, what I described to you earlier, that maturing of me was my nature wanted me to fight, even in the church, fight for what was mine, what I considered mine. Um, and that is not who God would have us to be. That is without God, that's who we would be. But that's not how we should behave in the church, because that's not of God. That's not what God would lead us to do. So number 5 says, how do you think Abram came to this proposal? Now, it doesn't say, thus saith the Lord, and the writer of Genesis, this is how Abram decided on this proposal. It doesn't say that. But I kind of read into the text as I read it. So A says he was a pretty smart guy. B says, well, he just spent some time talking to God. I imagine he saw the problem before he did, and the solution came to him during his time talking to God. So he went all the way through the Negev and back and forth, and went to this space. And do you think maybe he didn't already know this was going to be a problem? Maybe he noticed it. Maybe he heard from God that this was the problem, but it seems like he made a sacrifice to God, and he's spending time with God. He's talking to God, praying to God, and then he comes out. The next thing we learn is that he says, "Man, there's not enough space for all of us. Our people are arguing, and we shouldn't be arguing. Here's what we're going to do. We're going to go separate ways." That's a smart guy kind of thing to think of. He could have thought of that. And I'm going to give you first choice. That's not a smart guy kind of thing. That's not what we would generally do, because we had a great idea. Um, maybe he knew that would make it so that Lot didn't um, argue against all of this. Well, you're going to take the best or whatever, and this is what brought peace. But honestly, I don't think any of us are smart enough to intentionally do the thing that is selfless, that brings about peace, without the power of God. I just haven't seen that happening without the power of God, at least not commonly. So I really feel like Abram came to this solution in prayer. He came to this solution as he sought God, as he um, gave an offering to God. Now, here's another thing. The very fact that you would give an offering to God, that you would sacrifice something for God, is a selfless act. It is a humbling act. I'm giving something of myself up in favor of the will of God. And so that very act sort of changes us, I believe. It becomes the pattern of our life when it previously had not been the pattern of our life, and wouldn't have been. But sometimes just giving an offering to God sets the stage. So if I give an offering to God on Sunday, and then on Monday I'm faced with a decision of whether to be selfish in this situation or selfless, I've already begun the pattern of selflessness. And so there's something to that. Now, I still don't think I could do it without. I'm not just going to create patterns in my life of my own volition. I still don't think I could do it without God, but it sure does. It is a part of God's forming of me, if that makes sense. So I really believe that Abram's offering and his time with God brought him to this point. Um, Number 6, what did Lot choose? And that should be capitalized. What did Lot choose? Lot is a person. according to verses 10 and 11. A, well, he obviously deferred to Abram, his elder. No, he did. I just love in the church, every now and then, people start being so selfless that they're like, you choose. No, you choose. No, you choose. No. And actually, in my life, I have realized that being the one who's selfless can also be a point of pride. I got into the habit of buying lunch or coffee for people when I go out to eat with them and things like that. That was not my nature. God changed my heart, and a great pastor in my life and mentor established that pattern, so much so that it's often hard for me to pay for his because he just doesn't let that happen, and just still to this day likes to pay for my food when we go out, and that established something in my life. It changed me so that when I go out with other people, if I can't pay for his, then I'll at least pay it forward and pay for somebody else's. And I was kind of stubborn about that at the beginning. No, you're not going to pay for me. I'm going to pay for you. But then I realized at some point in my life that even me paying for somebody can become a point of pride, spiritual pride. No, I'm the most selfless one. And so it has, it's kind of a strange switcheroo where you have to learn then um, to let other people pay and do something nice for you, and that is humbling to let somebody do for you. And so these are a lot of lessons that I've learned over the years, and I'm still learning. So Lot did not naturally defer, though. He's like, "Oh, you're giving me first choice? Awesome." And I think we learn a lot about Lot, not only in this text, but as we go forward, um, sort of with this history of spiritual influence in his time with Abram, but also what happened when he really got into a place where the people did not love God. And as much as he might have tried to be the person of God within that place, there was certainly trouble. We'll just say that and leave it till we get there. Um, B. Lot saw the plain of the Jordan toward Zor was well watered, like the garden of the Lord, like the land of Egypt. And we're reminded that this is before the towns of that area were destroyed. So all the maps that I download, uh, and look at um, from this time, they'll have spots and they'll put Sodom question mark, Gomorrah question mark. The reason is because they were destroyed. Spoiler alert. Um, so they they're not there for us to say this is where they were. Now there has been archaeological digs that have found evidence of life under a thick layer of carbon, which suggests a natural disaster. Um, Pottery that has been burned and things like that. And so there are sort of guesses about um, what was brought about that caused the destruction of these things, of these places, but we really don't know exactly where they were. We're guessing from where everything else is and from the story we have here. But what we see is that Lot took the fertile ground in the Jordan River Valley, which some of which obviously when we look at now is not fertile ground because it was destroyed, and it's the the nature of things has changed. But apparently, this whole river valley had fertile ground at that time. Um, and the Jordan River Valley still does, but as we get down to the Dead Sea, that area not so much. And um, And that is the result of changes that happen when they were destroyed, um, which is, you know, not yet there when Lot chooses. So he chooses the most fertile ground, which is not what it becomes in the long term. Which I think is also, I mean, as I'm thinking about this, when I was called to ministry and called to full time ministry, and I was called to leave my job, at the time it was a very stable government job, government contractor job, and there were promises that if this company loses their contract, you'll be hired by another contractor because we want you, we need you in this program. And so it felt like a very stable job. Um, I left that job, went into ministry, chose poverty instead of that nice, stable engineering job, and really. A very short time later, the whole program shut down, and everybody that I worked with lost their jobs, and most of them found good jobs elsewhere, but some of them had to move and things like that. And so I think about what would have happened if I had chosen the stable job that would eventually go away, and what stress that would have caused in my life. And so essentially that's what Lot does. He chooses the one that looks stable, looks fertile, looks like the best, and he takes that, and ultimately Abram goes to a different land that no doubt has its own blessings there that are visible, but he didn't choose. He didn't choose. He let Lot choose the one that looked most fertile, and ultimately, his what he was given was better than what Lot chose for himself. That to me is a lesson. Many times, what we are given is more blessed than what we would have chosen for ourselves, or sometimes than what we did choose for ourselves. It's why it's such a struggle. We have a tendency to choose for ourselves what we think is best, and it is not blessed by God. And we find ourselves wishing we had chosen that which was blessed by God. C, well, apparently he took full advantage of getting first choice and chose the most visibly perfect land he could see from this vantage point, from his vantage point. That's what it looks like. Number 7, where did Abram end up according to verse 12? So we are told that Abram lived in the land of Canaan. This should trigger some things in our minds. He didn't go down to this area that was probably outside of Canaan, probably on the other side of the Jordan River Valley, um, but rather he ended up in Canaan, which is the land that God had already promised to his offspring. So the question is, did he choose the land that had already been given to his descendants on purpose? Yes, no, explain. And the best answer is no. He did what God said, and God made sure he got it. God blessed his selflessness. He gave Lot first choice. Lot chose this. Abram ended up with the land that God had already told him was going to be given to his offspring. Number 8 says, what plot twist do we learn in verse 13? It says, now the people of Sodom were wicked and were sinning greatly against the Lord. So Lot ended up down in this land that was where the people were terribly sinful. And that we can apply that to these thoughts that we've already had. That's where he ended up when he chose the land that looked the most fertile, looked like it was going to be best, and it's turning out not so great for him already. But that is also a foreshadowing of the whole next story, which we'll talk about not today, but in our next Bible study, which is just this is where we're going here. Lot chose the land, and people were sinful there. And there was an impact of that on Lot's life and on his family. Number 9, what does God say to Abram in verses 14 through 17? Hey, look around from where you are on this hill above everything on every side. That's my editorializing there. I will give your offspring everything you see on every side, which, by the way, seems to include also that area that Lot took. Um, so we have some more foreshadowing, perhaps, of what is to come. But on both sides, everything kind of runs down from there, and he's being told that all of this is going to be yours. B, I'm going to make your offspring like the dust of the earth. If you could count the dust, then you could count your offspring. So I'm going to make them like dust. Doesn't sound like a blessing, but what he's saying is, okay, count the dust. Oh, you can't count it? You're not going to be able to count. Nobody will be able to count your offspring either. Then he says, walk through the whole land I'm giving you. And I think of that as like a prayer walk or another survey of what God has given. And it's sort of a count your blessings. Like if you never heard the old song, count your many blessings, name them one by one. Count your many blessings, see what God has done. Count your blessings, name them one by one. I know it's not a very complex song. It's pretty simple for all the senior adults that remind me how our contemporary songs repeat the same thing over and over. So does that one. But the if we're having a bad day, if we're discouraged, if we're depressed, if we think everything is falling in on us and everything is turning against us, stop and count your blessings. And the simple act of looking around and seeing the things God has actually blessed you with actually turns around your thinking, because that's an attack of the enemy and a trick of the enemy to get you focused on all the things that are going against you when God has blessed you much more. Um, but um, but sort of walking the land that God has given him seems to me to be like an accounting, a survey of all that God has given him. And I think that's something that we could take from this, that we should take from this, that we should do, that we should learn to survey all that God has done for us, to take an account of all the things that God has given us. Number 10, what did Abram do next? A, he went to live at Hebron near some huge trees, the great trees, it calls them. And then he built an altar to the Lord. Are we seeing a pattern? So here he is. He begins to travel the land. He walks around the land. He finds a spot that he thinks will be good for his family, his people. And as soon as he finds this spot and decides to settle here, he builds another altar to the Lord, where he can just thank God, worship God for what God has given him, what God has done.